Hi everyone, and welcome to the first take, and for the sake of my film crew and the battery within the camera, let's hope the only take of the 7 types of calls an SDR needs to be listening to become an account executive. My name's Becc Holland. I'm the head of sales development at Chorus.ai. As far as our session today, I wanted to start with unpacking a little bit of context. So I actually was an account executive twice over, an enterprise account executive, and then I took a step back whenever I moved out to San Francisco to become an SDR and learn the tech ecosystem a little bit more. And one of the things that I had recognized in that making that transition was that they were almost entirely different roles. So as an account executive, I had been really focused on closing deals, close one business and making revenue for my company. Whereas as an SDR, I had geared my outreach a little bit different because I was a full-time prospector. So what I've seen in the industry is on average a year and a half long tenure as an SDR is what's average for the industry. And then after that period, an SDR wants to become an account executive. So at that bridge point, I want to be sure as an SDR leader that I'm preparing them all along the way so that then when they make the transition to the account executive role, they really crush it at that role and know what they're doing. So I do that in a myriad of different ways. One of the ways that I do that is I have my SDRs listen to calls. So on average, just for a little reference point, I have my SDRs over here at Chorus listen to about 20 to 30 calls as a minimum per week from the account executives so they know what they're saying on the phone. But without further ado, let's unpack the types of calls that I have them listening to. The first type of call I have them listening to is the resultant calls from the appointments that they set. So this is a really good way for an SDR to really understand what is going on in that appointment. Is it qualified or is it unqualified? And if it wasn't qualified, what is the reasoning behind that? So it better informs their prospecting along the way. When they make the transition from an SDR into an account executive, a lot of times as an AE, you're going to be doing a lot of self-prospecting. So it's really important that they tighten their game and understand that the type of people that they're hunting, are they successful appointments for the account executives on the back end, so that whenever they make that transition to the AE role, they know to tighten up some types of prospecting tactics and to double down on some others and the types of prospects that they're hunting after. The second kind of call I would suggest them, a type of call that I would suggest them listening to is segmenting calls. So there's a lot of different segments that most of us hunt into. There's SMB, a couple are listed here. SMB, general business, mid-market, enterprise, and strategic are typically the 5 buckets that I hear the most. But hunting an SMB deal as an account executive is a completely different mindset and strategy than hunting an enterprise deal. So SMB deal typically has a lower level prospect within the deal, and it's a shorter sales cycle. Whereas an enterprise deal, you're going to have to go through a lot of red tape, a lot of red lines within the contract, and you're typically going to have to get a lot of different stakeholders internally involved with a longer sales cycle. So it's really good for your SDRs, as they move up market, if they want to be an SMB account executive, want to be a mid-market account executive or an enterprise or general business, it's good for them to start to hear the different types of conversations that you're having in a longer sales cycle versus a shorter one, and the different kinds of stakeholders that they're involving at the account executive level to make sure the deal is closed. The third type of call I would suggest you have that your SDRs listen to are different stage calls. So a lot of the different stages are listed here. You have discovery calls, you have demo calls, you have proof of concept calls, when they're rolling out your platform into trial. You have proposal call, negotiation pricing call, and then you can have a red lines call. So we all know from the AE level or from a little bit higher up the chain, CEO level, that these are all very, very different calls. They all have different goals. In discovery, for instance, my goal of that conversation is to understand my prospect, more so in the discovery than anywhere else in the process of what matters to them high level, why did they decide to take the call, what kind of pain points are they having, and most importantly, what goals are they looking to solve with your platform. When you roll into the demo, it's really catering what you learned in discovery to the product that you have on board. So each one of these different stage calls, whether that's proposal, your initial proposal, and the negotiation with that, whatever your prospect comes back with of what's doable for them, each one of these are very, very different in flavor and very, very different in goals. So I suggest that you have your SDRs listen to a myriad of these so they can understand in this specific instance, but also start to learn in aggregate for your business what do these calls look like so that when they become an account executive, they can pitch their demo the same way that your lethal AEs are pitching today. The fourth type of call I would suggest them listening to is competitive calls. So there are two different pieces to a competitive call that I typically segment into. You have your head-on competitors and you have your semi-adjacent competitors. So a head-on competitor is someone that you would consider your competitor. Typically within the SMB or mid-market world, there's about 2 or 3 that you're going head-to-head with. And then you have a lot of platforms who may claim, may not claim, that they do something similar to you. And so from my perspective, if someone thinks that they can solve their business goal with using another platform, that is a competitor because perception is reality. So I would suggest having them listening to, like for instance, we have 2 really nameable competitors over here at Chorus. And so I make sure that my SDRs are listening to how the account executives are handling that conversation whenever they're asked about the competition and how we differentiate. So these can be really meaty, and if they've done good discovery, they understand what's important to the prospect so they know how to counter that objection appropriately. And it's actually pretty prophylactic if you do really deep discovery. But I want them to hear when the competition comes up, because they'll come up often, how my account executives, by and large, are handling that conversation. So we, number one, can hone in on what that competitive messaging is, what's working and what's not. And number two, my SDR learns that, so when they make the transition, they know how to handle that chat. The fifth kind of call that I would suggest they listen to is closed-won calls. So industry average is 20%. So you want your SDRs to be listening to, out of all the account executive calls that happened that week, which were the ones that won? Which were the ones that were successful? So instead of just listening to all of the account executive calls, you want them to zero in on the ones that were successful so they get a good flavor on what makes the difference between a closed-won call and a closed-loss call. So they start to pick up themes, habits, traits of the account executives. And I'm just thinking back to the reason I'm smiling. I'm thinking back to an account executive that I overheard him pitching this week, and he walked out and he said, "That was not my best call that I've had, over the last couple months." And I said, "Why?" And he started to explain to me a little bit of how he was frazzled and a couple of different things that made the call not that great. So it's really important to understand, okay, that is one of our most lethal AEs on our team. So I'm like, okay, what are the great calls that were closed-won and successful for him? And what's the differentiator between that and a closed-loss call, so I can kind of learn from my account executive's mistakes before I walk into that role. The sixth type of call I would suggest is objection handling calls. So, for an SDR, I put a couple of objections that an SDR gets on the phone or a full cycle prospector. So whenever you're cold calling into someone, you get not the right person, no time, no budget, send me an email. My favorite, I'm running into a meeting and I took this call because I thought you were somebody else. Typically it's an objection, or at least in my case. And so you want to hear what the objections sound like in a deeper sense on the back end for your account executives. There are a couple that come to mind for us over here at Chorus that we hear typically, but you want to hear how the account executives in a more elongated format are structuring that conversation in a way that makes the prospect feel comfortable that objection doesn't have a whole lot of merit to it. So they're open and really confident to choose your tool and say that this is the partner for them. So these can be a little bit different for every business. We're all really getting the same objections though. Send me an email in Q3 or Q4, maybe I'm going to delay the time date. But I would always suggest that your SDRs are listening to your business-centric objections, ones that you get really often, and how they can counter them once they slip into the account executive role to have success and crush their number. The last kind of call, and I drew a little picture here, is unicorn calls. The person who's actually filming this said that this looked like a dinosaur with a party hat on versus a unicorn, but I did my best. Unicorn calls are just kind of one-off specific calls where an account executive did something really particularly well. So one of the big value props for us over here at Chorus is that we can help share tribal knowledge really quickly. So if an account executive does something particularly well, they can tag the entire team in it and say, hey, this is how we should do this moving forward because it went really well for me in my call. And so unicorn calls can be anything from, an AE handled something particularly well, a one-off situation of, that is very specific and you want your SDRs to hear that in case they ever run into it. But another one that I use it for is new training. So let's say you roll out some of, the in-house or the big household name trainers, Sandler, Spin, Medic, Challenger Sale, and you want to make sure that your reps, number one, are deploying it on the phone, or number two, where they're struggling if they are deploying it and it's not working. So in my experience, I would say always sales methodology is a building business. If you want to figure out what works for you internally and how to make it your own. And so a training call where you use the training methodology and it really worked, or one where it really didn't, and how you can adapt that training to be company-centric so that you make sure everyone is crushing their number. So that's it. In summary, first call is calls the SDR set. Number 2 is segmented calls. 3 is different stage calls. 4 is competitive calls. Transition over to 5 is close won calls. 6 is objection handling calls. And we finish with unicorn calls. So that's it. Thanks everyone for watching and hope you have a great rest of your day.